Today, I will tell you the story of the week my own son tried to strip me of everything I had worked for. A week that began with his fists slamming on my kitchen table and ended with a move he never saw coming. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The light from the window spilled across the small oak table where I had set out 3 cups of tea. I had chosen Earl Grey because I thought a calm conversation might still be possible. I was wrong. David, my only son, leaned forward. His eyes were sharp, his jaw tight. Then his fists came down with such force that my cup rattled. The delicate rim clinked against the saucer. "Give us your life savings or pack your bags and leave." His voice was low, but every word carried the weight of an ultimatum. Melissa, his wife, stood behind him. Arms folded, chin slightly lifted, but I caught it just for a moment. Something flickered in her eyes. Not pity, not regret. Something closer to fear. I set my cup down, steadying it with both hands. "All right," I said quietly. "Give me 1 week." David blinked. Maybe he expected tears or a protest. Instead, I met his gaze and held it. They thought I had surrendered, that I would open the account, drain the balance, and hand over the decades I had spent working double shifts, saving every dime. But in that moment, I was starting the only game I knew I could win. My son slammed his fists on the table. "Give us your life savings or pack your bags and leave." I nodded quietly, but 1 week later, the shock I delivered left him speechless and furious. He never saw my next move coming. Melissa broke the silence first. "It's not like you need this much space anymore. We're the ones who could make better use of it." Her words cut through me, not because they were true, but because they were practiced, rehearsed. It was the kind of reasoning I had heard whispered between siblings in other families, the kind that turns parents into a resource instead of a relationship. I let the quiet stretch between us until David shifted in his chair. "So we're agreed. 1 week." He pushed back from the table. The legs scraped across the floor, leaving a faint mark I would later notice when sweeping. They left together, the front door closing with a dull thud. My hands rested on the tabletop, still feeling the vibration of his fists. The lavender plant on the windowsill trembled slightly, leaves quivering in the breeze from the door. I took a deep breath, stood and poured what was left of my tea into the sink. The week had begun. They would spend it imagining a victory already won. I would spend it preparing something far different. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best, you will understand why I did what I did next. And before we go further, if you love stories like this, real grandma life stories about dignity, justice, and the strength no one sees coming, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Because this one still surprises even me when I think about it. When the door closed behind David and Melissa, the silence felt heavier than it should. I stayed there in the kitchen for a long moment, tracing the grain of the table with my fingertips. This was the same table Frank and I had bought from a thrift store in 1983. We couldn't afford anything new back then, but Frank sanded and polished it until it shone like honey in the sunlight. It had been here through every season of my life. I walked into the living room, letting my hand trail along the banister of the staircase. 40 years ago, Frank and I had built this house, piece by piece, not with our own hands, but with our own sacrifices. Every month, that mortgage payment hung over us like a shadow. We skipped vacations. We drove the same battered pickup until the engine gave out. When the roof leaked in '92, we patched it ourselves under the summer heat, laughing about how we were earning our home twice over. Back then, Asheville wasn't what it is today. It was quieter. The streets less crowded, the coffee shops fewer but warmer. Our little corner lot was surrounded by rolling hills and pine trees, and in spring the air smelled of wild honeysuckle. We found this plot because Frank swore he could see potential in the way the morning light fell across it. He said, "Teresa, this is where we'll put down roots." I believed him. The house was modest cedar siding, white trim, a front porch deep enough for rocking chairs, but it was ours. Over the years, the wood darkened to a rich, weathered gold. I planted lavender in the backyard because Frank loved the scent. He said it made him think of open fields in Provence, though we had never been to France. By midsummer, the yard would be a sea of soft purple humming with bees. I stepped outside then onto that same porch, feeling the cool boards beneath my bare feet. From here, you can see the edge of the second lot, the one most people think is just a strip of unused land. But it was always more than that to Frank. His dream was to open a small auto repair shop there after retirement. He'd worked 35 years as a mechanic for the city, and he wanted a place where he could still tinker with engines without anyone telling him to hurry up. But retirement came, and then illness followed. The shop never happened. Still, he refused to sell that land. One day he told me you might need it more than you know. I didn't realize at the time how right he was. I walked down the steps into the yard, letting my fingers brush over the lavender stems. The late afternoon sun caught the silver in their leaves, and for a moment I could almost hear Frank whistling from somewhere behind me as if he were carrying in a box of tools. It's strange how a place can hold echoes like that, layers of life you can almost touch. Inside the house smelled faintly of wood polish and old books. In the hallway, framed photographs lined the wall. David as a toddler in overalls, his hair sticking up in every direction. The three of us at a 4th of July barbecue, Frank grinning beside a rebuilt Chevy truck. I stopped in front of one from the summer of '95, David, maybe 12 years old, holding a fishing rod beside Frank, both soaked to the knees from wading in the creek. Back then, David's eyes had been full of wonder, not calculation. This house has been my shelter through storms, both literal and otherwise. It's where I learned to make do when the money ran thin, where I nursed Frank through his final illness, where I sat by the window, night after night, paying bills and keeping the lights on. Every wall, every floorboard carries the weight of those moments. That's why David's words at the table weren't just a threat to my savings. They were a threat to the very history I had built, history he once belonged to. You cannot measure the worth of a home in market value alone. You measure it in the nights you stayed up to fix the furnace and the neighbors who brought you pie when your husband passed, in the way the front door creaks just enough to let you know someone you love is home. I know some people would say it's only a house, that you can start over anywhere, but they would be wrong. This is not just wood and bricks. This is where my life happened. I turned away from the photos, walked back into the kitchen, and looked out at the garden again. Beyond the lavender, the second lot sat in quiet patience, just as it always had. Frank's shop never stood there. But the land was still mine, and for the first time in years, I began to see it the way he must have potential, waiting for its moment. I wasn't ready to tell David or Melissa what I was thinking. Not yet. Let them believe I was counting down the days until I handed everything over. As the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the porch, I reached for the kettle to make another cup of tea. In my mind, I heard Frank's voice, as clear as if he were standing beside me. "Hold on, Teresa. Play the long game." I smiled faintly, knowing he would approve of what I was about to do. I wasn't just protecting wood and bricks, I was guarding a lifetime. David had not always been the man who stood in my kitchen demanding my life savings. There was a time when I believed he would change the world. He had been that rare kind of student, sharp as a blade, with a mind quick enough to solve problems before his professors had even finished presenting them. When he graduated from the University of North Carolina, his name appeared in the Asheville Gazette, praising him as a homegrown tech talent to watch. At 24, he co-founded a small software startup with two classmates. They were building an app designed to connect local farmers directly to restaurants, cutting out middlemen. Investors noticed. For a few years, it seemed David's future was made of gold. I still have the clipping from the Gazette. His smile, confident, his arm draped around his business partners, each of them wearing a hoodie like they were the next Silicon Valley trio. Melissa entered his life during those years of promise. She was working as a real estate agent then, the kind who could sell a house within days, just by the way she staged the furniture and scented the air. She was striking tall perfectly, put together with a voice that could turn polite pressure into an art form. The two of them together looked like they belonged in a magazine spread about young success in the South. They married quickly, blending their ambitions into one life. Melissa had expensive taste designer handbags, dinners at the Grove Park Inn, weekends in Charleston. David didn't mind. Back then, the money flowed easily enough, but dreams have a way of souring when reality shifts. The startup struggled to scale beyond the region. Competition grew. Funding dried up. David began trading cryptocurrency on the side, convinced it was the next great frontier. I remember him sitting in my living room one Thanksgiving, his laptop balanced on his knees, explaining blockchain to me with the kind of fervor people reserve for religion. At first, he made small gains. Then came the crash. In the span of 3 months, he lost $120,000 money he had pulled from his own savings, from what was left of the company, and from a personal loan he had convinced the bank to give him. The bank still wanted its $30,000 back with interest. Melissa's luck turned soon after. The real estate market, overheated for years, began to slow. Houses lingered on the market, clients grew cautious, and commissions evaporated. The boutique agency where she worked downsized. Her name was not on the list of agents they kept. They sold their condo in Charlotte, moving back to Asheville to regroup, as David put it. But regrouping cost money they no longer had. Their credit cards were near their limits. The bank's calls grew sharper. Somewhere along the way, their gaze shifted. It started in small comments, Melissa mentioning how large my house was for just one person. David asking casually about the value of my property taxes. I had thought they were making conversation. I see now they were taking inventory. I have replayed the moment in my mind when that gaze hardened into something more dangerous. Maybe it was the afternoon Melissa stopped by, unannounced, standing in my doorway with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, asking if I had considered downsizing now that I was retired. She spoke as though she were doing me a favor, but there was calculation in her tone. Or maybe it was when David over coffee brought up reverse mortgages, as though they were simply another investment tool, not a way to strip equity from a home you had spent a lifetime paying off. Their situation worsened. They were behind on rent for the small apartment they had taken. Melissa's car was repossessed. David's credit score plummeted. The stories they told me about job interviews that almost worked out began to sound rehearsed, and with every passing week, their patience thinned. By the time they sat across from me at that kitchen table, fists on wood, their decision had been made. In their minds, my savings and my home were not mine anymore. They were a lifeline, one they felt entitled to grab, no matter how tightly I might be holding on. I could still see traces of the boy who once spent an entire Saturday helping Frank fix a fence, laughing every time the hammer slipped from his hands. But those traces were buried beneath desperation, and desperation changes people. It doesn't excuse them. It doesn't make what they plan to do right. But it explains why the kindness I had once known in them had been replaced by something colder. They were drowning, and they had decided I was the lifeboat. They didn't care if I went under in their place. The following Thursday, I was folding laundry in the upstairs bedroom when the phone on the kitchen counter began to ring. Melissa's voice floated up the stairs, bright at first, the way she spoke to strangers when she wanted something from them. I wasn't trying to listen, but something in her tone made me pause, my hands stilling over a stack of clean dish towels. "I'm telling you," she said, her voice lowering just enough to sound conspiratorial. "If she gives us the savings, we'll sell the land next. That'll wipe everything clean." I froze. My heart gave one hard thump, then steadied. She was talking about the lot, the 1.5-acre strip of ground behind the lavender garden, the one Frank had refused to part with even when we could have used the money. They didn't know that land was mine, solely mine. It had never been included with the deed to the house. It was purchased separately in my name only before David was even born. Frank had insisted it be that way just in case he'd said, just in case of what I never thought to ask. Melissa's voice grew sharper. Yes, I know it's in a good location. They're breaking ground on that shopping complex in 6 months. By the time construction starts, that land will be worth double, maybe triple. We could get $500,000 easy, but first, we have to get her to liquidate the savings so she's not clinging to anything. The sound of her laugh, a short, humorless exhale, cut through me like glass. I stepped closer to the stairs, my bare feet silent on the carpet. She didn't hear me. She won't fight it, Melissa continued. David says she's too sentimental. She'll think we're doing it for her own good, and if she complains, we'll tell her the house is too much for her to handle. Then we'll convince her to sign over the land she probably doesn't even remember what it's worth. I felt the old cedar railing beneath my palm as I leaned forward, steadying myself. They had done more than think about my savings. They had drawn a map, and that land was the treasure at the center. I pictured the lot in my mind, the gentle slope down to the creek, the way the morning sun turned the grass into a sheet of gold. Frank had mowed it himself until his knees gave out. It had been empty all these years, but it wasn't forgotten. And now, because of the city's new development plan, it had transformed from a quiet stretch of green into prime, commercial property. I had read about the project in the paper, a sprawling shopping center with boutiques, restaurants, and a hotel. The developer was offering top dollar for adjacent parcels. My land was directly across the road from the main entrance. Melissa had done her homework. She wasn't wrong about its value, but she was dead wrong if she thought I would let it go under her terms. From below, I heard her voice soften again. No, David doesn't suspect I'm talking to you. We'll tell him once we've got her signature on the account forms. Then we'll push for the land, one step at a time. I backed away from the stairwell, the words burning into me. I had spent my life believing my son's happiness was worth any sacrifice. But what I heard in Melissa's voice wasn't desperation anymore, it was strategy. She wasn't just trying to survive, she was plotting to take everything piece by piece until nothing of my life remained. The thought of them sitting across from me, smiling politely while their minds ticked through the numbers, made something harden inside me. I returned to the bedroom, setting the towels down with more force than necessary. My hands weren't shaking, but my chest felt tight, like I was holding back a tide. I had been underestimated before. People mistook quiet for weak patience, for passivity. They never understood that silence could also be the space where plans were born. Frank's voice echoed in my memory, steady, certain. Teresa, you don't have to shout to win. They wanted my savings. Then they wanted my land. They didn't know that land was a fortress and it had been built with more than money. It had been built with foresight, with stubbornness, with a promise Frank made to me long ago. The game they were starting wasn't the one they thought it was. 2 days after overhearing Melissa's phone call, the phone rang again. This time the voice on the other end brought back the smell of motor oil and summer afternoons from decades ago. Teresa. It's Lucas. He said his tone warm, steady like he'd been expecting me to pick up. Lucas had been Frank's closest friend since high school. The two of them had built their first engine together in Lucas's father's garage, back when gas was 35 cents a gallon and life felt endless. He was the best man at our wedding, the one who always dropped by unannounced with a six-pack and some ridiculous story to make Frank laugh until his ribs hurt. It had been years since we spoke, but his voice carried the same easy confidence. I heard about the new development going up by the bypass, he said. Word is they're looking for parcels close to the main entrance. You still own that piece of land out there. My grip tightened around the receiver. I do, I said slowly. Why? Because I'm interested, Lucas replied. Very interested. I've been looking for the right spot to set up a restoration shop. Cars, motorcycles, a small showroom. That location would be perfect. I can pay cash, no financing, no delays. Cash. In my mind, the word rang like a bell. Not because I was desperate for it, but because cash meant speed, and speed meant staying one step ahead of David and Melissa. I'll make you a fair offer, he continued. Better than what those developers will start at, and I can have the paperwork drawn up by the end of the week. I glanced toward the kitchen doorway, listening for footsteps. The house was silent. I might be open to that, I said carefully, but there's one condition, Lucas. Name it. You keep this between us. No one, and I mean no one, can know until the deal is done. He didn't hesitate. You have my word. It wasn't just a precaution. It was the first rule in the game I was about to play. Never let your opponent know the real move until it's too late to block it. Lucas cleared his throat. I'll send a guy I trust to handle the title search quietly. We'll meet at my attorney's office in Hendersonville. Less likely anyone will see you there. I could almost see Frank in my mind's eye, leaning against the hood of his old Chevy, nodding in approval. Lucas had always been the one who understood the value of keeping certain things off the neighborhood radar. That land has history, Lucas, I said softly. Frank always wanted to hold on to it. I know he said, his voice gentler now. But I also know he'd want you to use it when you need it most. We agreed to meet Friday morning. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table and let the quiet settle in. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint stirrings of control. The land wasn't just an asset, it was leverage. And leverage in the right hands could become a shield. I took out a yellow legal pad and began making a list. First, confirm the boundaries and zoning status. Second, have Lucas's offer in writing. Third, ensure the proceeds went directly into an account David and Melissa couldn't touch. The pen moved steadily across the page. This wasn't just about protecting myself from their demands for my savings. This was about making sure they never got the chance to turn that land into their lifeline. Somewhere deep down, I knew this was the first real step toward ending the game they thought they were winning. By the time they learned about it, the land would be gone, the money secured, and their foul sin would have vanished beneath them, and they would never see it coming. The call came on Wednesday evening, just as the last streaks of sunlight were slipping behind the Blue Ridge. I recognized the voice instantly, soft, deliberate, with that hint of careful optimism she always carried. Aunt Teresa, it's Evelyn. My niece had a way of speaking that made you want to put down whatever you were doing and listen. She was 21 now, in her second year of nursing school at UNC Asheville. She'd always been the quiet one in family gatherings, the one who stayed behind to help clear the dishes or sit with Frank when his breathing grew labored. When Frank's heart began to fail, it was Evelyn, barely out of high school, who learned how to monitor his oxygen, prepare his medications, and adjust his pillows so he could sleep without waking every half hour. She never made a show of it. She just showed up day after day because that's what you do when you love someone. "How's school?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. She hesitated before answering. "Good. Mostly good. The workload's intense, but I'm learning a lot. I might need to pick up extra shifts at the diner to cover next semester's tuition." There it was. The thing she didn't want to say. I could hear it in the small drop of her voice. I didn't tell her about David and Melissa, or the meeting with Lucas, or the knot of betrayal tightening in my chest these past days. Instead, I thought of Frank's smile the last time Evelyn brought him tea, how his hand lingered on hers in thanks. "You're going to finish that program, Evelyn," I said firmly. "We'll figure out the money." "You've already done so much," she protested. "You gave me Grandpa's old watch. You helped me with books last semester." That was nothing I said. Some investments aren't in banks. They're in people. And you, my voice caught just enough to feel it, you're worth more than any account I've ever had. I could hear her take in a breath on the other end, the kind that comes when words land deeper than expected. "I'll pay you back," she said. "I don't need you to," I replied. "What I need is to know you'll be the kind of nurse who listens before she speaks, the kind who notices when someone's hands are shaking as they reach for a glass of water, the kind Frank would have trusted." We spoke for another 10 minutes about her upcoming exams, her roommate's obsession with lavender candles, the possibility of her visiting when classes eased up. I didn't tell her that I was already rearranging my plans in my head, that the money from the land might not all be locked away. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a while. Evelyn didn't know it, but she had just given me another reason to see this through. This wasn't just about keeping David and Melissa's hands out of my accounts. It was about making sure that when I left something behind, it went to someone who would use it to build, not to drain. In that moment, the chessboard in my mind shifted. Evelyn wasn't just family. She was the unexpected heir to the part of my life worth protecting most. The next morning, I drove into downtown Asheville, the mountain air crisp enough to wake even the heaviest sleeper. My destination was a red brick building on Pack Square, where an old brass plaque read Ellis and Crowley Attorneys at Law. Marjorie Ellis had been more than just a friend. She was the kind of woman you wanted on your side when the rules got murky. We'd met decades ago at a church fundraiser. I'd baked pies. She'd raffled off free legal consultations. Frank used to joke that if the world ever fell apart, I should call Marjorie before I called him. She met me in her office with the same wry smile she'd worn back when her hair was chestnut instead of silver. "Teresa, it's been too long," she said, gesturing to the leather chair across from her desk. "What's got you coming to me instead of enjoying that garden of yours? I didn't waste time. I need to make sure my house can't be sold while I'm alive. Not by anyone. Not under any circumstance." Her brows lifted slightly, but she didn't press for gossip. "All right. We can file a transfer on death deed, name a beneficiary you trust, and add a life estate clause. That means you keep the right to live there for the rest of your days, and no one can touch it. I also want a restriction," I added. "A formal covenant recorded with the county prohibiting any sale or transfer during my lifetime." Marjorie's pen paused mid-note. "You're planning for trouble. I'm preparing for certainty," I corrected, "and I want it airtight." We spent the next hour going through details who the property would go to. I gave her Evelyn's full legal name, the parcel number, the legal description from the county records. Marjorie explained the legal language in plain English, making sure I understood every line before I initialed. When she slid the last set of papers toward me, she tapped the top page. "This clause here, this is the lock. Even if someone tried to challenge it, they'd have to go through me, and I don't lose fights over paperwork. That's why I'm here," I said, signing with steady strokes. After the notary stamped everything, Marjorie leaned back in her chair. "You know you're not just keeping them from selling it. You're making a statement that your home isn't a bargaining chip." I thought of David's fists hitting the kitchen table, Melissa's calculating stare. It's more than a home. It's the last place Frank and I built together. If they can't see that, then they don't deserve the keys. Marjorie slid the documents into a thick envelope and sealed it. "I'll file these with the county this afternoon. By sunset, no one will be able to touch your house without your say-so." On my way out, I paused in the doorway. "Marjorie, if anything happens to me, make sure Evelyn knows everything. Not just about the property, about why I did this. You have my word," she said. As I stepped back into the bright morning, a quiet certainty settled over me. This wasn't just about retaliation anymore. It was about drawing a boundary so clear that even desperation couldn't blur it. I wasn't simply outmaneuvering David and Melissa. I was building a fortress around the life I had left. And for the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. For the next few days, David and Melissa seemed almost cheerful. Not the kind of warmth that comes from love, but a brittle, over-polished shine like cheap silverware pretending to be sterling. David made small talk he never used to bother with. He'd ask about the weather, about the lavender in the garden, about whether I'd seen any good shows lately. Melissa chimed in with saccharine compliments about my cooking, as though she hadn't rolled her eyes at my pot roast just last month. They thought I was preparing their payout, that every polite nod I gave was a silent agreement to their terms. At dinner that Friday, we sat around the oak table Frank had built in his workshop. The roast chicken steamed between us, its scent mingling with rosemary from my garden. I carved each piece carefully, placing a drumstick on David's plate, then a breast for Melissa. They smiled as though we were in some picture-perfect family scene. But I could see it in the tightness around their eyes. They were counting down the days. Melissa poured herself a glass of Chardonnay. "It'll be nice," she said casually, to get everything settled. "Give you some breathing room, Mom." I kept my gaze steady. Breathing room. She laughed lightly, swirling her wine. "You know, Less to worry about. We'll take care of things. You can just relax." I wondered if she realized how closely her tone mirrored that of a realtor coaxing a client into signing over their home. David cut into his chicken, speaking between bites. "It's for the best. This place is too much for you now." Their words buzzed in the air like flies over a summer picnic, persistent, unwelcome. As Melissa reached for the breadbasket, I found myself looking at David's hands. Bigger, now rougher, but I remembered them, smaller, softer. He had been 10 years old the day Lucky disappeared. That old golden retriever had followed him everywhere from the school bus stop to the creek behind our house. One afternoon, Lucky slipped out of the yard. We searched for hours, calling his name until our voices cracked. When we finally found the dog lying still by the roadside, David had dropped to his knees, burying his face in Lucky's fur. His sobs had been raw, unfiltered grief. I'd held him then, feeling the weight of his loss as if it were my own. That boy, the one who cried for his dog, would have been horrified by the man now sitting across from me. The memory pressed against my ribs like a bruise. I realized I wasn't just protecting a house or land or savings. I was holding on to the last pieces of someone I used to know, someone who had once been tender and kind and unguarded. But the man in front of me had gone too far. Melissa's voice pulled me back. I was thinking she said once we get everything organized, we could finally take that trip to Hawaii we've been talking about. David could use a break after, you know. She waved her hand vaguely as if losing $120,000 in bad investments was just a minor inconvenience. David chuckled, sipping his beer. "Yeah, sunshine and no worries." I smiled faintly, hiding the thrum of my pulse. Let them plan their vacations. Let them think they'd already won. The silence between my words was my only weapon for now, and I wielded it carefully. When dinner ended, David offered to help clear the table, a gesture so rare it felt almost comical. I let him stack the plates while Melissa wiped the counters. The three of us moved in a choreography of false harmony, each pretending the air wasn't thick with unspoken terms. As I dried the last dish, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, shoulders, straight eyes steady. I thought of the documents Marjorie had filed, the land already set in motion with Lucas, the promise I'd made to Evelyn. Outwardly, I was the picture of quiet compliance. Inwardly, the clock was ticking, and every second brought me closer to the moment they would learn the truth. I turned off the kitchen light, letting the room fall into shadow. "Good night," I said, my voice calm. They answered in unison, warm and hollow. Behind my closed bedroom door, I allowed myself one deep breath. The kind you take before walking into a storm, not to brace against it, but to remind yourself you know exactly how to navigate through. Lucas arrived on a Wednesday afternoon driving his old Ford pickup, the same one he and Frank used to haul timber when they built the workshop behind the house. I saw him step out, dust clinging to his boots, a man who never needed to prove his word was good. We shook hands on the porch, the lavender scent drifting between us. Neither of us spoke about David or Melissa. This meeting wasn't about them. Inside, I had already laid the papers neatly on the kitchen table. Marjorie had prepared everything, a clean transfer of the 1.5-acre lot, the signatures, the notarization. The price we'd agreed on was $410,000. Lucas would pay in full. No loans, no banks, no delays. Lucas looked at the first page, then up at me. "You're sure about this?" "Teresa," I'm sure I said, my voice steady. "This land was Frank's dream once. But dreams change. I have my own to protect now." He nodded slowly, pulling a pen from his jacket pocket. "Frank always said you were the sharper one between the two of you." Guess he was right. The pen scratched across the paper, my name following his in precise strokes. Page after page, each signature felt like closing a door behind me and locking it. When we finished, Lucas slid a cashier's check across the table. It was heavy in its silence, the kind of weight you feel without lifting. I'd already decided where it would go. That morning, I'd met with the manager at Asheville Community Bank to set up a trust in Evelyn's name. She didn't know it yet. The account would be locked until she finished her nursing degree, and it would cover her tuition, housing, and a modest cushion to start her life without debt pressing on her shoulders. I endorsed the check, instructing the teller to transfer $210,000 directly into the trust. The remaining $200,000 went into my own account, quiet, untouched, waiting for whatever storms life might still send my way. Lucas leaned back in his chair, studying me like he was measuring a blueprint. "You're playing a long game." "I have to," I replied. "They think in days and weeks. I think in years." He smiled faintly. Frank would be proud. The sound of his name caught me for a second. I let it settle before I spoke again. "This isn't just about keeping something from David and Melissa. It's about making sure I never have to stand in my own kitchen and be told I don't belong in my home." Lucas's expression hardened. "You don't owe them a thing, Teresa, not after the way they've treated you." I didn't answer. Not because I doubted him, but because I knew anger was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. Precision was my currency. Every move had to count. Before Lucas left, we stood on the porch again. The late afternoon sun slanted across the yard, catching the edges of the property that was no longer mine. But it didn't feel like loss. It felt like transformation, like shifting weight from one side of the scale to the other until balance returned. "Keep this between us," I told him. He gave me a short nod. Not a word. As his truck pulled away, I watched the dust rise behind him and thought about the check already moving through the banking system. By the time David and Melissa realized anything had changed, it would be too late. That night, over dinner, they were their usual polished selves. David asked if I needed help calling the bank to make the transfer easier. Melissa made a joke about how confusing all those numbers could be at my age. I smiled politely, folding my napkin after the last bite. In my mind, I could still feel the smooth edge of the cashier's check, the ink of my signature still fresh. When I went to bed, I placed the bank receipt for Evelyn's trust in the top drawer of my nightstand, a small slip of paper, but heavier than gold. In the quiet darkness, I thought about Evelyn in her scrub's hair pulled back, tending to patients with the same gentleness she'd shown Frank. Some investments I knew couldn't be measured in interest rates or market returns. They grew in people. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a transaction. It was the opening move of an endgame I had no intention of losing. They arrived on a Saturday morning, the kind of cold, brittle air that makes sound carry farther. I had set the kitchen exactly as they liked, coffee brewing a plate of Melissa's favorite lemon scones on the counter. It was important that nothing felt out of place. David walked in first. His smile stretched too wide to be real. Melissa followed her heels, clicking against the hardwood, her perfume drifting ahead of her words. So David said, hanging his coat over the back of a chair, "You got everything sorted with the bank I did." I replied, my voice even. "And I have something for you both." I opened the drawer of the sideboard and pulled out a plain white envelope. No name, no markings, just thick paper folded around the weight of its contents. I set it on the table between us. Melissa reached for it first, sliding her manicured nail under the flap. She pulled out the check, her eyes scanning the numbers before freezing. $5,000. Her smile faltered. "Is this?" She glanced at David. David's jaw tightened. 5,000. "That's it." "That's it," I said. The silence that followed felt like the whole house was holding its breath. The hum of the refrigerator grew louder. A clock somewhere in the living room ticked too slowly. David leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. "You told us I told you I interrupted that I would give you something this week. And I have." Melissa let out a short, sharp laugh. "This barely covers a month's rent for us." I folded my hands in my lap. "Then you'll have to budget carefully." David's eyes hardened. "You've got more. We know you do. Why are you playing games with us?" "No games." I said, my tone calm enough to unsettle him. This is what I can give without compromising my own life. And I've decided my life still matters. Melissa's lips pressed into a thin line. You're living alone in this big place, sitting on assets that could help your family, and you're hoarding. I tilted my head. Is that what you call protecting the home your father and I built from nothing? Hoarding David's voice rose. You don't need this house, Mom. We could sell it. Pay off the debt. Start fresh. That debt, I said, cutting him off again, isn't mine. I didn't invest in something I didn't understand. I didn't spend money I didn't have. I didn't gamble your father's hard work on a whim. The silence that followed was heavier than the first. David sat back, but his glare stayed fixed on me. Melissa crossed her arms, her nails tapping against her sleeve. Finally, David spoke. If you think $5,000 is going to fix this, you're wrong. We need more. And we're not going to stop asking. I stood picking up the now empty envelope. Then I suppose you'll have to keep asking. My answer won't change. Melissa's chair scraped against the floor as she stood. You're being selfish. I met her gaze. If self-preservation is selfish, then yes, I am. They left without finishing their coffee. I stood at the kitchen window, watching them walk down the driveway, their movements sharp and stiff against the cold. In my pocket, I could still feel the faint warmth of the trust account receipt from the day before. Evelyn's name printed in bold letters. $210,000 waiting for her future. The check I'd given David and Melissa had been deliberate, a token to close the conversation without giving away the truth. The real move had already been made, and they were still playing a game I'd finished days ago. The house was quiet again. I poured myself the coffee they'd left untouched and sat at the table where the envelope had been. Outside, the lavender swayed in the wind the same as it had for 40 years. I wasn't rattled. If anything, I felt lighter. They thought they'd seen my hand, but the real cards were still hidden right where I intended them to stay. They were back before dusk. I left the porch light off and met them. David did not sit. He planted himself at the head of the table. Melissa hovered by the counter, fingers locked around her phone. $5,000 is an insult, David said. We need the rest. You promised a week. The week is up. I promised to decide, I said. I have decided. He exhaled hard. Stop playing with us. I am not playing, I said. I pulled a folder from the sideboard and set it on the wood. You asked for my savings. That check represents the balance I keep for emergencies. Groceries, utilities, a broken water heater. There is no hidden stash for you to claim. Melissa's chin lifted. You expect us to believe that after all these years in this house, equity alone could clear every debt we have. You are speaking about equity, I said, as if I were a bank. You could liquidate on demand. The house is not an account. It is my residence. It is also legally out of reach. David's shoulders stiffened. What does that mean? It means I met with counsel, I said. There is a recorded restriction against any transfer while I'm alive. The title includes a life estate in my name. No lender, agent, or relative can sell it. Melissa's phone lowered. You went that far. I went as far as safety requires, I said. You demanded everything. I secured the roof over my head. David's voice thinned. Fine. Then we take the land. You forget we know about it. I did not forget, I said. I opened the folder and slid a page across the table. The notarized transfer caught the light. The land you keep eyeing is no longer mine. It was sold this week. Clean title. Proceeds disbursed. There is nothing left there for you to circle. He stared as if the letters might rearrange. Sold to who? To a man who knew your father, I said. A man who pays his debts and signs his name in ink. Melissa found her voice. How much? Enough to honor your father's labor. Enough to serve the future I choose, I said. The money is secured where your panic cannot reach. Part supports education. Part keeps me safe. None of it will pay for mistakes I did not make. David's hands landed on the table, but softer now. You would watch us sink. I would watch you learn to swim, I said. I will not let you climb on top of me to keep your head above water. Silence moved through the room. Melissa pressed her lips until the color bled away. David looked toward the hallway. He seemed smaller beneath the frames on the wall. You sold the land behind my back, he said. I sold land that was solely mine, I said. I did it in front of a notary. You assumed my property was a family wallet. It is not. I have helped you when help made sense. I will not finance denial. He sank into a chair. You chose strangers over us. I chose boundaries, I said, and I chose legacy. Your father wanted that parcel kept until it could do the most good. Now it will. A young woman will finish school without debt. I will keep my home. And you will face the truth that the fastest way out of a hole is to stop digging. Melissa swallowed. Are you cutting us off? I am cutting off the idea that I exist to underwrite your life, I said. You are adults. I will not be your collateral. For a long moment, no one moved. Then David nudged the folder back toward me. So this is final. It is lawful and it is final, I said. If you want something from me, bring respect. Bring a plan that does not begin with what I can sell. Bring the boy who cried for his dog and fixed fences. I have room at my table for him. He looked away. Melissa reached for his sleeve. He did not pull back, but he did not lean in either. When they left, there was no slam, just the click of a decision sealing itself. I stood in the kitchen. The fear that followed me lifted. In its place was something steadier than triumph. I had said no. I had meant it. I had protected the life Frank and I built. Outside, lavender shifted in breeze. Inside, the table bore marks of fists and pen strokes, history and intention in the same grain. I slid the folder into the sideboard and breathed scent of lemon oil and tea. The game they started ended here, on my terms, in my house, with the truth laid bare. They reached the porch before anger finished with David. He spun. You will regret this, he said. He took the steps in 2 strides and stalked toward the driveway, keys clattering in his palm. Melissa stayed where the porch meets the path. Her shoulders trembled as if the cold had remembered her. She pressed her fingers to her eyes and the mascara smudged. 2 dark commas slid toward her jaw. I did not move toward her. Kindness is not always rescue. Sometimes it is refusing to play a part in someone else's spiral. David yanked the car door and stood there, half in and half out. You pick strangers over your family, he said. You chose documents over your son. I chose a line that should have been honored before it had to be written, I said. He slammed the door. The sound jumped along the siding. The engine coughed, then roared. He pulled forward too fast. Gravel spat across the mailbox. Then he slammed the brakes. The car idled. He placed his forehead on the steering wheel and sat there breathing hard, trapped between rage and the knowledge that rage had no power here. Melissa lowered herself to the first step. She cried without sound. I tried, she said. I tried to keep us above water. You can still try, I said. You can try differently. She shook her head. Jobs are scarce. Rent is crushing. The bank is circling. David wakes at 3 and checks numbers that do not change. I know the shape of fear, I said. It does not excuse the shape it makes out of us. A cough sounded near the hedges. Mr. Alvarez, my neighbor from 2 doors down, paused with his terrier tucked under one arm. He nodded once. I would do the same if my kids tried that, he said. A home is not a piggy bank. Melissa's head snapped up. You do not know our situation, she said. I know the price of labor and the price of loss, he answered. I buried my wife last spring. All I have is our house and what we built inside it. No one gets to spend that for me. He tipped his cap and walked on. The gate clicked behind him. Melissa pressed her palms together. People will talk, she said. They will call us heartless. They will call you cruel. Let them talk, I said. What matters is what we do next. David shut off the engine and stepped out. Anger had drained from his cheeks. He stared at the yard. You will not help us, he said. I will not sponsor denial, I said. I will pay for counseling if you want it. I will pay for one session with a financial counselor. Debt is not solved by burning the roof that shelters you. Melissa stood. Her knees wobbled. We cannot start from zero. That is not true, I said. Zero is a place. It is not a sentence. You are adults. You are not helpless. There are shifts to pick up. There are smaller spaces to rent. There are budgets to write and obey. David's eyes shone. You make it sound simple. It is not simple. It is possible, I said. Frank did it. I did it. Most of this street did it. He looked into the hallway where our photos hang. He did not step inside. If we fail, he said, will you watch? I will watch, and I will not drown with you, I said. I will answer when you call with a plan. I will end the call when you call with a demand. He slipped back into the driver's seat. This time he left. Melissa wiped her face with the side of her hand. The mascara left a watermark. She took 2 steps backward and stopped. I am ashamed, she said. Not because you said no, because I forgot what you taught me. What did I teach you? I asked. That we do not take what was never ours, she said. That we live inside our means and inside our word. I nodded. Shame can be a beginning if you let it be a teacher. She drew in a breath and squared her shoulders. I need to find work, she said. There is a hiring notice at the new grocery on Merriman, I said. Night shift, reliable hours, benefits after 90 days. She nodded once and walked down the path. The cold took her in. The street kept its quiet. I stood on the porch until the light over the mailboxes clicked on. Then I went inside and set water for tea. The kettle began to sing. I wrapped my hands around the cup. Calm returned like a tide, steady and honest, leaving room for breath. The first ripples began at church. I set out pound cake in the fellowship hall. Whispers moved faster than the coffee line. Eyes flicked toward me, then away. Mrs. Jordan from the choir squeezed my arm and said I had done the right thing. A deacon muttered that families ought to settle their business privately. The pastor asked for prayers for wisdom. Everyone understood without a name. Mr. Alvarez stopped by with his terrier tucked against his cardigan. He patted my shoulder and said, "A roof is sacred. You defended yours." I did not join any circle. I stacked plates and kept my peace. By Monday afternoon, the whispers had hardened into stories. Some said I had thrown David out. Others said he had tried to evict me. The truth sat between those extremes. Gossip is air without weight. Only choices carry substance. The phone rang that night. David's number glowed. I let it go to voicemail. His message was flat. A local catering company had withdrawn a small technology contract they had promised him. The owner cited concerns about reliability and references. The owner's sister sits 3 pews behind me at church. David said it was my fault. Then he hung up. I set the phone face down and watched steam curl from my teacup. Contracts are made from trust as much as signatures. The town had decided he was risky. Perhaps they saw what I had already learned. In Asheville, character follows you like a shadow at noon. The next morning, Melissa called. Her voice was raw from crying. She had interviewed at 3 agencies. 2 were cutting staff. One asked whether recent events at home might distract her from clients. That afternoon, she sent a link to a leasing position in Hendersonville. Stable hours, benefits after 90 days. The kind of job that pays bills instead of buying status. I told her it sounded honest and worth pursuing. By Thursday, she had an offer contingent on a background check and a week of training. She would need to stay near the office while they rotated her through properties. Hotels are expensive. Pride is more so. She asked for a modest room. I gave her the number of a widow from church who keeps a room over her garage for interns and nurses. Melissa thanked me carefully. I assured her help did not come with hooks. News travels in small towns without a driver. At the grocery store, the cashier admired my backbone. A stranger whispered that I had humiliated my son. I nodded without offering a defense. A life cannot be argued in a lobby. It must be lived at a table worn by years. Late that week, I saw David on the sidewalk outside the hardware store. He looked tired. The ambitious gleam had dulled. He raised a hand but did not step closer. I asked if he had eaten. He said he was late for a meeting with a banker about debt consolidation. He blamed the town for being small and mean. I said the town is small and remembering. The church bulletin announced a fundraiser for the youth choir. I baked 2 pies and taped a note on each tin. One read for music, the other read for courage. Mrs. Jordan laughed and told me I was stirring the pot with sugar. On Sunday, the pastor preached about boundaries. He said mercy has shape. Without edges, it becomes permission. People nodded. A few glanced at me. After the service, the deacon who had wanted privacy apologized. He said his sister had signed away her house to a nephew who promised care. The nephew sold it and moved to Florida. Melissa left for Hendersonville with a suitcase. She texted a photo of a tidy office and a blank leasing ledger. She said she would learn the software and try to be the kind of employee who is worth keeping. I told her to buy a good pair of insoles and to drink water between tours. Practical care is how love travels when pride blocks grand gestures. That night, the house settled into its familiar creaks. I turned on the porch light and watched moths drift in and out of its halo. The lavender rustled. A delivery truck sighed down the road toward the future shopping complex. Consequences arrived on time, not as vengeance, as simple arithmetic. Choices add up, bills come due. Character writes the memo line. I washed the teacup and set it upside down to dry. There would be more days like this, complicated, unglamorous, sturdy. Justice had not made me louder, it had made me clear. In the silence, I heard Frank whistling off key in the workshop, reminding me that steadiness is a kind of song. I believed it again tonight. The call came just after sunrise on Saturday. I was measuring compost for the beds when the phone buzzed in my apron pocket. Evelyn's name glowed on the screen. Aunt Teresa the bursar just emailed me. Tuition is paid in full. The hold is gone. Relief poured through her words. They said the funds came from a student trust. I leaned against the porch post. Then you can focus on patients and books, I said. No extra shifts. She paused. I know you had something to do with this. I had something to do with believing in you, I said. Finish what you started. That is all I ask. I will, she said. I will make you proud. Grandpa, too. After we hung up, I set the rake against the fence and walked the garden row by row, letting the cool air rinse the week from my chest. The lavender had gone unruly. Stalks leaned across the stone path. I fetched the pruning shears and began trimming one bunch at a time. The stems released their oil under the blades. Scent lifted in quiet blue clouds. Bees worked without bothering me. The rhythm steadied me. Snip, gather, tie, lay the cuttings on the table to dry. I swept the path, straightened the trellis, tucked mulch around the rosemary. The soil was dark and forgiving. My hands remembered the weight of years. Inside, the kettle sang. I poured hot water over loose tea and carried the mug to the porch. Peace did not arrive like a parade. It settled the way dew gathers on grass. I let it find me. I thought about the whispers at church, about Melissa's suitcase and the smaller map she was drawing, about David fuming beside the car because anger felt easier than inventory. None of it reached me here. The garden drew a border around what grief could touch. I bundled the last row and set the lavender to dry. The color looked richer against the weathered boards. The porch smelled like a field after rain. A robin landed on the bench back. It tilted its head and sang. I laughed once, surprised by the sound. My phone buzzed again. A photo from Melissa showed a neat desk in a modest office. The caption read, "Training starts Monday. Thank you for the contact." I typed back, "Work hard, drink water. You can build from this." She sent a small heart. It felt like a truce drawn in pencil, faint but honest. I lifted the old hose and watered the hydrangeas along the fence. Blue blooms bowed under the spray and rose again when I moved on. Resilience is not louder than hurt. It is simply more patient. I learned that from seasons. I learned it in marriage. I am learning it again in a kind of motherhood where love and boundary share a roof. By noon, the sun burned the mist away. I stacked the drying racks on the dining table and labeled each bundle with the date. Some would become sachets for the linen closet. Some would go to the church raffle. Some would steep in olive oil for winter salve. Doing small things made the large things behave. I walked the perimeter once more, pausing at the place that used to separate the yard from the second lot. Grass had knitted the line from view. Only memory knew where the stake once caught a mower blade. I touched the spot with my shoe and nodded. A door had closed. Another had opened toward a life that fits. Back inside, I washed soil from my wrists and let the water run clear. The mirror over the sink held a woman who looked exactly her age. I liked her. She had chosen a future without noise and found it not by winning arguments, but by refusing to enter the wrong ones. I dried my hands and set the mug in the sink. The afternoon stayed simple. I gathered the mail. I wrote Evelyn a note on thick card. I told her that skill is a promise, that kindness is a practice, that some investments are not in banks, they are in people. I sealed it and pressed the stamp with my thumb. From the porch, I could see the road that will carry shoppers to the new complex. I did not resent it. Towns change, families change. What matters is what remains when the wind lays down. The lavender slowed its sway. The bees drowsed. A maple shadow crossed the step like a hand laid gently over mine. I stood and breathed until the day felt finished. When it did, I believed again that calm is not the absence of storms. It is the harbor we learn to build. I felt ready for tomorrow's work.